Okay, first let's start here. Is there anything? Because we just did a show. It feels like we just did a show, but did we cover everything under paganism that you wanted to cover? Because we
Um,
and our friends got on, and we were just like, "Hey, everybody, come
yeah,
hang out!" And it
we
turned
had a
into
really
a
good
whole
time.
thing.
I think the what we didn't get to is some of the ways. Um, so the the mutability of natures in paganism. I think we didn't get to
Mutability is
really.
nature. Mm.
Yeah, and we didn't we didn't really get to the eschatology of paganism, which I think it would have been fun to talk about a
Oh,
little bit.
okay. Well, let's do it. The mutability of paganism.
The eschatology of paganism, I think, would be
The thing.
the thing
Okay.
that I think. Yeah.
Can you give
Um,
us a recap then, kind of paganism and how it operates? And because my head, part of it, and I gotta apologize to you, man. I was like trying to run all the things, and I was not listening as well as I normally listen when it's just us. And I was trying to run Twitter, I was trying to run YouTube, and I was trying to run
yeah.
Spaces. And I think I figured out what was going on with Spaces. Next time we do it,
Okay.
I'll do a better job. But I think next time I'm gonna have somebody else run all that stuff, and I can just talk you.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, so that way I'm not distracted.
Yeah. Well, we talked about the tribalism, which I think is really important to recognize. Um, so tribalism, so the way that paganism gives an identity is um, is by group membership. So group membership is taken to the very top and made the most important aspect. In to the point that in tribal pagan societies, the well in really in all pagan societies, if you're in the in group, then you are human, and if you're outside the in group, you're not human. So in imperial paganism, that has to do with citizenship. Citizens are humans. Everyone else doesn't have the rights of a human. So it's not so you're not, when you enslave somebody, well, they're in the slave class, so it's okay. If you're in India, in imperial India, if you're at the top, then there's untouchables at the bottom that literally don't deserve your pity, um, even though their lives are hard and they're in pain, and they're because they're not a part of your caste. The caste system is a pagan ideal. But then in tribal paganism, if you're in your clan, or if you're in your tribe and they're in their tribe, your clan, their clan, then they don't have this. Because they're outside your group, they are not the same kind of being as you, and so you don't have to give them the same sort of love and care, and that you do if they are a part of your group. And so this is what Jesus is getting after with the Good Samaritan. He's getting after that pagan mindset that had settled into, because of, I think, the amount of time they'd been in the empire, and because of the worship practices that they had,
Well,
because they
idolatry,
had the idolatry.
when the law comes in, it destroys those pagan ideas as well, doesn't it? Because the law is saying, no, this applies to as a sojourner in your land, it applies to you. Everybody, it changes the idea. So everybody's equal under the law, even your slave, right? Matter of fact, you have a limit on how long someone even can be a slave,
Yeah,
right?
right, because there isn't a slave class,
Right.
right? You there because the slavery generally is because of poor economic decisions, not because of the caste that they're in, or the class that they're in, or the tribe that they're in, or
In
any of
Israel,
those things.
it became
In Israel.
restitution, right?
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah,
what
exactly.
okay. And there was a time of Jubilee where it's like 7 years. That's all you got. That's all. That's
Right.
it. And
So
just to add one more thing on that too. And so when you were even given loans, if somebody was like, it was at a 7-year period where you would forgive all debts, God even was very careful to say, no, if you are at that 7-year period, you're like, oh, this person's not gonna be able to pay me back. He still requires you to say, no, do what's right and just, give them the loan, and he will be the rewarder for doing that. So, if you say this person is taking out a loan and you're like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to pay it back in 6 months, and that's when the 7-year cycle ends, and I have to forgive the debt. God's like, don't think about the time frame in which it ends. I think this is in Deuteronomy. He's like, no, go ahead, do what's right, and God will take care of you. So there's a lot of protections for people that are not necessarily even citizen, but that's particularly to Israel.
Right. So, but the reason that the Good Samaritan hit so hard is because Israel, the Israelites in the story, as Jesus tells it, are all acting like pagans.
Because they've walked into idolatry, and so they're
yeah. So their worship, they're becoming like what they worship, and then the Samaritan acts like a true Israelite, right? In the story, the Samaritan acts the way an Israelite ought to, and the reason that an Israelite ought to act that way is because that's what God is like. That's what their God is like, and that's the point of the story. That's what their God is like.
I'm sorry to sidetrack you, but I just thought about something we don't say enough, which is idolatry is directly connected to our economic realities. And we think that we can replace a system and that fixes the problem that we have economically. Well, the problem is the feds. Well, no, actually, you have an idolatry problem, and the feds are the result of your idolatry, right? And we keep on thinking that there's another way to get past this apart from repenting of our sins. Anyway, I was just thinking about when you said that.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think and this is why something like Marxism, when it comes along, we don't recognize that it's really just paganism. We don't, but we don't recognize it because we had already fallen into the similar idolatry as a culture that Marx was working in, right? And so what he did is he systematizes and gives economic names to the magic system that he's setting up. But we had already agreed on the witchcraft, right? We had already agreed. Well, it's some sort of witchcraft, right? There's some sort of the metaphysics of magicians had already settled on them because of their idolatry. And so when he comes along and he just says, hey, I found the knobs and levers to control the system, then there were people that were like, yes. And then the other people were like, no, the knobs and levers are over here, right? Rather than saying, where economic prosperity is a gift from God direct. When you worship God, economic prosperity follows to a culture. A culture that doesn't worship God, I don't want to say culture, a people group.
It's come to that. I have questions for you about that. So I have
yeah. So it's not the culture's not a thing. It's an abstraction. It's not a thing.
Well, okay, you got to explain what you just did. Why don't you want to use culture? Because I think any other time we probably would have, but there's something that you're thinking about that makes you say, yeah, let's not use culture.
Because because the culture is being subtly redefined right now, and I think it has been slowly being subtly redefined and given a metaphysical makeover. Because culture is used to be a series of adjectives that people shared in common, right? It's not a thing. Like when you say, hey, go grab me 2, you say, well, 2 what? 2 what? So, well, no, just go grab me 2. You say, well, it can't. 2's an adjective. Go grab me blue. Well, blue what? But I can't grab blue. Blue's an adjective. An adjective doesn't have a substance in and of itself. An adjective is a descriptor of something that has a metaphysical reality, a noun, right?
Bruh.
And
Okay. Okay.
so
I
do you see what
yeah,
I'm saying?
right.
So culture originally, what a culture, when you say, oh, well, what's the culture? It's the series of adjectives that kind of a group sort of shares, basically. It's not really a thing. A culture is not a thing.
So you
A
said
cult
culture is not a noun.
Yeah, culture is not a noun. It's culture is an abstraction, right? It's you're abstracting from the nouns. Here's the adjectives that describe this people group. But the people group, the metaphysical reality of the people group is around something that has a substance. So a language, a space, right? They all live in the same neighborhood, maybe they live in the same city. A uh, Something that a covenant, right? They are
Mm.
the citizens of a particular state. They're citizens of a county. Those are covenants. They're citizens of a of a nation, right? They're citizens of a church. So you've got um there are things to describe people that are real, but a culture is actually just not a thing. Like it's a metaphysical abstraction. But it's because of our empiricism, and because of our pagan assumptions, we're feeling more and more comfortable just saying that a culture group is somehow a reality, right? That group of people shares this love of curry,
Okay.
right? Or something, right? So you say, well, that's an adjective about a group of people. But what makes them a people? It's not their love of curry, right? Like there's got to be a covenant somewhere. There's got to be a something
Mm.
that God uses to describe, right? A language, something. And and so I don't want to, but it's so easy to fall into because there is a sense in which the way you use a word is meaning,
It's turned into
um,
yeah.
because language is mutable on purpose. But you can mutate language in the wrong way, and you can mutate it in the right way, or evolve it. Let's use evolve in a positive way, right? You can evolve language in the right way, and you can mutate it in the wrong way. Um, you don't always get the X-Men just because you got a mutation, right? So,
Mm.
um, and I think culture is being the word culture, which the word culture is a noun, but the word culture is describing a group of adjectives that we are reifying or acting like have a metaphysical reality underneath it. That because we can observe these similarities in a people, they're all the same. But I think I've told this story before, but I worked the night shift at a gasket factory, and with the group that had the Vietnamese translator, because a
Mm.
Christian owned
Oh,
company.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so they had translators for immigrants. So they had a Vietnamese translator on the night shift, they had a Spanish translator, and they had a Russian translator, um, on different shifts. And so people that spoke those languages tended to go on to a particular shift. And then they also had a um, coming out of prison work program, so they helped people getting out of prison with a kind of work release, and then they would be set up so when they got out of prison they had a job. And so they had this whole system. It was a gasket factory that was run in a very Christian way, that was very purposeful about making sure that they were opening opportunities for people that didn't normally have opportunities. And so there was this gentleman that I worked with. So it was all Vietnamese guys that spoke Vietnamese, the one Vietnamese translator who spoke English and Vietnamese, and two other guys that spoke English that were on this prison release program, and myself, who was in seminary at the time. And so at lunch break at 11:30 at night, I didn't know where to sit, and so I tried to sit with the guys that spoke English. Didn't work. We were not of the same mind about what life was for. Tried to sit with the uh, Vietnamese folks, which I was comfortable with, but it made them uncomfortable. So then I moved over to a table by myself and started bringing homework. And then one of the Vietnamese guys came over and he said, "You're a Christian." And he didn't speak English, so this took about 10 minutes. And I said, "Yeah, I'm a Christian." And then he gave me a theological exam. He said, "You think Jesus is the only way?" You think Jesus is the only Lord of heaven and earth? And he's just like went through kind of the creeds about Jesus to make sure that I was a real Christian.
He's been
And then
cool before.
yeah, exactly. It's like you can't trust these white people. They'll say they're Christian, and then next thing you know, they're like, "Oh, but the Buddha's great too," you know. And and then he said, "You, me, the same, all them different."
Mm.
Right. And it really struck me. He had been a prisoner of war. He was a Buddhist when the Vietnam War started, and he was a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. He was a lawyer in South Vietnam who joined up, um, prisoner of war, and he prayed to the God of the nuns who taught him to read as a child while he was in this POW prison. And the soldier, right after that, the guy came in, who was their guard, and he flipped the bed over, rustled everything around like he was getting searched, and he turned around and he left, and he forgot to lock the door behind him. And then he said he watched out the open door of his cell. He watched one of the soldiers walk over and unlock the front gate, open it, and walk away. And he ran for it, ran through the jungle, ran out the door, ran through the jungle, and found American soldiers who stuck him on a plane. And he dropped him off in Spokane, Washington. And
Wow.
he walked to the first steeple with a cross on it that he could find. And that church helped him find a Vietnamese speaking church, which is a Roman Catholic church. He got baptized. Since then, his wife has joined him. She got baptized. One son had joined him. He got baptized. And his other son, he said he prays for every day. He's still a Buddhist in Vietnam. And he knew that all cultural differences were nothing compared to the fact that the two of us love Jesus, follow Jesus. We're in covenant with God and God's people, right? So that was the reality that defined us. So he and I were the same. Everyone else was different. And it doesn't make those adjectives not real. About, you can describe, his wife used to send me egg rolls, just so that we had something that we could share at lunches together. So, because from then on, we sat together at lunch, and I helped him with his English, and we told stories, and he told me what he would try to tell me the good things that his pastor had preached on Sunday in English, and it was really fun. But the what it doesn't mean that like we suddenly have the same culture in the right use of the word, right? The very few of the adjectives about us are the same, but the reality of our identity is actually the same. He got it exactly right, and that's why he wanted to make sure. That's why he gave me the theology exam. Right? That's why he wanted to know if I actually believed that Jesus was Lord and Savior and the only way, and all those things. This is a Vietnamese Roman Catholic with incredibly evangelistic. I could hear him trying to explain the gospel in Vietnamese to his coworkers. So that's where I think the cultural differences are fine. But let's say we're in a world where it's that is the entire, something happens, and our the families represented there are somehow dropped onto a desert island. My kids have one family that is marriageable in that setup, right? It's his kids. My kids can only marry his kids because my kids have to marry believers, right? They have to marry Christians. So you've got this situation where the that's the the fundamental identity is covenantal. Or no, in all situations, the fundamental identity is covenantal. Culture is not is an abstraction. So that's why I don't want to use culture. That's a long explanation. Right?
No, but I think it's important, and I think there's so many pieces in there. We'll have to have. I want to put. I already know that there's probably a boatload of people listening to this who just heard Roman Catholic and Christian together, and their heads blew up. So that's another conversation. I want to say that because I think that'll come up in there.
It's true, but even my most Baptist friend is gonna, this guy so obviously loves Jesus, right? So
Yeah.
this is not like the guy that's like, well, yeah, of course I'm a Christian. I was baptized as a kid. Like, he wanted to make sure I wasn't that guy, because right, like he's so because I think we can all agree on that. It's Jesus. It's faith in Jesus that we're saved by, right? We're not saved by being a part of the right denomination. We're
Well,
saved by faith in Jesus
yeah,
alone,
yeah. Again,
with nothing else, right? Like, that we agree on that, right?
no, we don't. No, because
I'm just too Protestant. Like, this is
oh,
like,
oh,
salvation by faith alone is
he get
so absolutely central that, and I think
no. I think
if
that
I meet
people.
somebody that believes in Jesus, it doesn't matter what denomination they're in.
No, there's only a group of denominations that fit inside of orthodoxy. And if you are a Christian, then you won't be inside of that denomination um, because you haven't heard, or you're not believing in the truth of the reality of what you say you believe in. Right. I think that is, which is why, well, when you look at, you know, just for instance, the charismatic movement, I think a lot of people, particularly those inside the MacArthur circles, he's written on it. They just immediately and there's some wacky stuff, man. Like I was there. I know there's wacky stuff, but um, you can be on the outside of orthodoxy, and then you don't qualify to be inside of the circle,
But
right?
yeah, but
And that's not the conversation I want to have, because I want to talk about. But go ahead, I'll let you answer, and then because I think this is a bigger conversation, and I think it's going to take over everything else.
yeah, but I think that's there's some there. I'm allowed to say this. I think there's an underlying paganism to the way that reasoning is being done.
Mm.
If the way you just reasoned it is something that they would say, yeah, that's an accurate description. This is not I'm not normally in that conversation, so I'm
Yeah.
um the be but because it's not um salvation is not an in-group out-group question. It's not a tribal question. Salvation is a covenantal question, right? The promises of God are that if we believe in Jesus, we will be saved, right? So, and then faith is a gift. It's a question of, do we believe the promises of God? Do we have faith? And the promises of God are not something that's held by one denomination, right? The promises of God are public.
Can I
Jesus
challenge that?
was,
Go ahead.
yeah. Well, I mean, and Jesus was crucified in public. The promises of God are public, right? The word of God is public. It's not it's not the property of any particular denomination, and in fact, faith is created by it, right? By the word of God. So you the the word of God comes to us, comes into our ears. Faith, and faith grows up within us. And that's the work of the Spirit, right? So, and that power is not held by a particular denomination.
All right, let me push back. See, this and took over the whole conversation. It's not what I was planning on. But
It's true, but I think that this is, yeah, go ahead.
it's got to be in and out. It's got to be in and out markers. Got to be. I'm gonna play devil's advocate here because Mormons ain't in. I don't care how much they say they love
Right.
Jesus.
For
Right.
sure.
J Dubs, not in. One is Pentecostals, not in. Like they're clearly outside the markers and they would easily identify as saying that they love Jesus. So there's got to be in and out markers on this.
There are in and out markers, but
so a confession of Jesus is definitely essential and important. But what you mean by what you say when you are confessing Christ kind of matters.
Right. It absolutely does.
And I think people are applying that same kind of logic to Catholics. When you look at a lot of their doctrine, you're like,
But this is the question though, is what are the markers?
Let me ask this question. Do EO folks fit inside that marker? Because I don't know. I don't know enough about Eastern Orthodoxy.
Yeah. So because in my mind, are they Trinitarian? Right? Do they have some sort of baptismal succession back to the early church?
Okay.
Right. So they're a historic part of the church. They're Trinitarian and they're doing the sacraments.
Right.
Right. Baptism and the Lord's Supper.
But is there not a form of idolatry in their worship? Icons, images, those kind of things in the worship.
Yeah. Do they have things in their worship that are idolatrous? Yes.
Okay.
Because but you definitely Baptists don't.
What? Wait. Wait, you gotta explain that one because that would hit. And I'm like, where what do you see theirs?
Well, okay, first off, the absence of error is not the
marker.
Is not the marker, right?
Okay.
That's not so the marker is not the absence of error. The marker is
I'll give you that one.
The markers are positive, right? Are they Trinitarian? Are they doing the sacraments?
Oh, wait. I'm gonna pick one on you. Female pastors. I'm like, run.
Right. So, but there's also the question is not would I go to church there?
It's
right?
if they're qualified for being justified.
Right.
Is that the question?
Yeah. So
okay.
This is a justification question. So if I meet somebody
about justification, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all we're talking about.
All right.
Can I meet somebody and say, because I could meet a Roman Catholic and 3 minutes into the conversation, here's a good example. Met a Roman Catholic recently. Was talking to a Roman Catholic recently, who was like, you know what? I've been reading a lot of the Buddha's writings right now, and I've just realized that, all religions are the same. It's like, you're a terrible Roman Catholic, right? And that's what I told him. I told him he's a terrible Roman Catholic. And he said, in the future, all the Roman Catholics will agree with me. I was like, okay, yeah,
right.
Yeah, but it's not true. But yeah, I don't believe it at all. That's but then you meet someone who but I've had the same thing with Baptists, right? Where you meet a Baptist, you meet a Presbyterian, and pretty soon you're like, you're not a Christian. Like, you don't believe, like, you might be going to church sometimes, and the baptized maybe or something, and but
you don't hold to
the substance of the matter isn't there, because you confess. It doesn't take much for you to start explaining to me why it is that you don't believe, right? That situation, you can find that a lot, and you can find it everywhere.
But how do you go ahead?
But you can also find, somebody that you get talking to and they really, really love the Lord, and they're from, here's a good example. I worked at a electrical contractor, and we had an electrician who was an Eastern Orthodox guy, big beard. He had been a Hindu in India, and an Eastern Orthodox evangelist. Um, traveling Eastern Orthodox evangelist in northern India came through preaching the gospel, and he got radically saved, right? Radically saved from Hinduism, ended up leaving India. While he was flying home from India, his plane landed he had a layover in France, and he met a Roman Catholic nun. He switched up his flight to go talk to her parents, um, and say, I'm going to go marry your daughter. And they were fine with that because they were kind of sad that she'd become a nun, which meant no grandchildren. And then he flew to her monastery, talked her out of the nunnery, brought her home, married her, and they had a big group of kids. And I was like, dude, first off, this is manly. Like, that's some manly Christianity right there. I'm gonna go get me a nun. So, but this she loved the Lord.
She broke her vow. I just want everybody to know that.
Yeah, but what if you take vows that are against God's will, against your own nature? I think you're allowed to break those vows. But that's a
whole nother story.
A whole nother story. But I did look up to this dude.
Yeah,
he was like, "That's the girl I want. I don't care if she's in a nunnery. I'm gonna go get her."
Yeah.
Right. So,
but when you have an apostate,
but he but that's but I think,
I mean, I sympathize because shoot, I was in a church where it was charismatic, speaking in tongues. I don't even know if they really had the Trinity doctrine properly right, but I know I was a Christian. And I was in that church, and I know I was in that church my whole life. Is where I learned the Bible and all this stuff. It's not like, and I don't think you could have ever told me any different until it was time for God to take me out of there.
Yep.
That I was in a bad church. It's not that I don't think Christians can be and really that church probably if it was examined would be outside the categories of orthodoxy. Like there's no question.
Right.
And never mind the fact that it's led by a woman too. So
right. Well, I mean one of the we had a female pastor in the church I got saved in too, and her and her husband were both pastors.
Yeah.
And they were phenomenal Christians who were led poorly.
Yeah. My wife was the pastor. So
yeah,
and
I think so I think this I guess the central point is the justification is by faith, right? It's not by being in the right group. It's not an in-group, out-group.
I don't think that's what people are trying to define it. They want to make it as by you have to have some right doctrine, right? If you're confessing, your doctrine needs to be at least orthodox, right? So if you're getting saved,
right? But that's why if a Jehovah's Witness comes to the door, that straight out the gate, the assumption is we got heathens on our hand, right? I always try to get them to leave the Bible because I tell them that it's not theirs. So if they've,
right.
I open up the table of contents and say, where'd that come from? Where'd that table of contents come from? Right. Was not from your church. So that's not your Bible. I'll just take it. You can just leave them with me. They never leave them.
Oh, okay.
No, they never leave them, but they don't come back.
Yeah.
But I just, it's their church started in the middle of the 1800s, but they're like, oh, but the Bible, it's ours. Like,
yeah. No way.
Yeah, no way. That's not how his story. There's no, I mean, besides the fact that they, deny the Trinity, they deny Christ, all that, and then Mormons are polytheists, right? So you've got oneness error, you've got polytheism, you've got other religions
Catholics don't fit
that
inside
aren't
of that though?
Christians. I've never met a. I mean, if you meet a polytheistic Catholic, they're bad Catholics. They're not following the actual doctrine. You know, Roman Catholics they believe the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed. They confess the Apostles' Creed,
Mhm.
all that. So
I find
I
Catholic
don't.
charismatics really close together. Not necessarily. I think charismatics fit more into a Baptistic culture, where Catholics, but they share the same sort of, one sense, cosmology about the world a little bit, where um, they still live in a very, very supernatural world where um, kind of like saints, like they want, like in the charismatic world, you can get a handkerchief with the oil and anointing oil on it from the prophet. And it could be a 10, 15, $100 handkerchief or blessing or whatever. And you can get that blessing for the low price, right? Like
Right.
but that's the same thing. Catholicism has the same thing, has the icons that they have, same thing. And you can be healed, and so it still has that. So they share a same sort of cosmology in a lot of ways. But I've
Yeah.
always felt like that, but charismatics are never going to be praying to Mary. They're not going to have some sort of intermediate outside of Christ. So they've always, and there's a lot.
So they might pray to the guy on TV.
No, I don't think they pray to him.
I mean,
No,
they
no.
go they're going to ask him for healings.
They'll go and ask him to pray for them. Yeah, okay, yeah, I see what you did there. Yeah, but I don't see that any different than going to the elders and having them pray for you. Right? Like, I don't think that they're thinking the same thing about the guy as um there is some prophet worship there. I will say that. There's some
Right.
like,
It's a possible error, right?
sure. It's possible.
Yeah.
I
It's a possible error.
I never looked at that guy any different than I think they looked at a prophet. Like, the man of God was no different than a prophet or, a Levite in that matter. He wasn't angelic or supernatural, or he couldn't do, the only thing, yeah, there's some mixtures there. I see that.
Yeah.
As I'm
Yeah.
thinking
So
about it, I think there's some mixtures. But anyway, that's kind of my point. But I just think they wasn't one to one. I don't think they're one to one though.
no, probably not 1-to-1. But I also think that, that you're gonna get 7, 8 different descriptions of what it means when they are praying to saints when you talk to 4 Roman Catholics,
I've seen that.
The-
Well, and I've run
so
into charismatic Roman Catholics where I'm like, why are you even Roman Catholic? I don't get it, because every time I would talk to them, a person who is really what's his name? He debated Obama back in the day. He was an ambassador for America to I can't remember. I see his face. Keys, Alan Keys.
oh yeah, yeah.
I've talked to Alan Keys before, and man, Todd Frail went through the gauntlet with him when we were on Wretched, and he came out and was like, I don't know if that's Roman Catholicism. That's not what I'm used to hearing. He might be inside of more our camp, but claiming Roman Catholicism. And so I've run across a few Catholics
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, and I
But,
run. Go ahead.
but I think that the problem is that when we think in terms of that there's a particular view of denominationalism that isn't that is an us them. If you're in
Mm.
our group, then you're justified, even if it's not eternally justified. You're temporally justified, and if you're in their group, you're not temporally justified, right? So that our corporate salvation before the Lord, our corporate righteousness before the Lord isn't by faith, right? It's by something else. Justification has to be by faith if it's going to be biblical, whether it's corporate justification, whether it's individual justification, whether it's civil justification. All justifications are by faith, scripturally speaking. There is no justification by works in the Bible, and it doesn't matter which group or individual you're talking about. And I think we easily slip into the corporate justification is by works, by being a part of the right group, rather than really believing that the mark of justification is only faith. I don't know.
No, what were you gonna say?
This is where, well, I think this is where, like, you know, I
That's hard to argue against.
but
Like, it's my justification, but, and you're like, whoa, wait a second, I just said but. It's
but that,
justification.
and this is where, like, like when I get sideways with Baptists or with whatever group, and the whole time I'm like,
you're not arguing about justification,
right? You're not arguing about justification, and I tend to be a lot more ecumenical, I think, than a lot of folks. Like, I want,
oh yeah, everybody
like,
right now is like, not agreeing with you.
like, I'm so grateful that one of the main guys that discipled me was Baptist, charismatic, and I'm so grateful for. I was just talking about this because a friend said, "Oh, I got to hear this guy preach." I was like, "Oh my gosh, can you believe that was the guy that when I was a new Christian, that was the guy whose Bible study I was in. I was just like completely spoiled because he's such a great preacher and he loves the word and he loves the Lord, and he was historically minded, and he's Baptist, charismatic, and um, and I wouldn't ask for anyone else. He's not in my tribe, but his love of the Lord is far exceeds mine, and so he's the guy to follow, right? So
Okay, this might I want to we need to have this conversation in a deeper kind of on its own, because but I think you brought it back around to why some of the current conversations we're having in our political environment and even in our Christian circles, it's kind of come. Oh, what just happened on the back of my screen? Oh, I'll figure that out. It's kind of coming to a head. Hold on one second. It's kind of coming to a head because everybody's trying to figure out what's marking in and out, what's the parameters in which you're a part of us. And it's not just a nation question of America, like, are you a part of America or not? Are you a part of Christianity or not? Are you a part of um you know our community or not? All these new markers are being our people are working through for, it seems like, the first time. And it's kind of, I think it goes back to a conversation we've had a long time ago about World War I, World War II, metaphysics. All that stuff is being challenged because it's all out of whack. And so things like so you have, because you have a different idea, I think your understanding of the table, your understanding of covenant, you have a different parameter for what marks people in, right? Is that fair?
Right. Well, I want to. This is what I want, and what I want to do is have the same parameter that God has.
Okay.
Right. So I don't think that that
who wants different. Everybody wants.
No, I know that's what everybody wants. But what I'm saying is, when I think that God has actually given us some parameters to deal with, and I think it's like a lot of things that he does. He gives us layered parameters that take wisdom and adult thinking, but he gives us some layers and says, here's kind of here's the parameters of in and out, and here's what to do when somebody's in that shouldn't be, and here's what to do when somebody's out that shouldn't be.
So then, because
it's possible that somebody's in and they shouldn't be, right? That's a real possibility.
Yeah.
I think in God, the way God set up the world, but that's that's a part of it. And I think that we don't want that.
We
It's
don't want
easy to not
pollution.
want that because then we have to do something about it. It's
So
easier to be able to say, well, they're not really in anyway.
so I think there's a massive fight against multiculturalism, because multiculturalism has been, and so part of it for me, I'm trying, what is multiculturalism the way it's being used right now, and in a conversation, and maybe just a definition of what is it traditionally, because I don't know if it's
Yeah.
always been.
Well, I think we got, what's it called, Mott and Bailey'd on multiculturalism,
Okay, explain that.
where they said, hey, here's the thing I'm trying to do, and we said okay, and then they gave us a different thing. Is that what
Um,
Mott Bailey is?
uh
No, no,
no,
not quite.
oh, no.
It's like the inside out Mott Bailey.
Okay, yeah, because moat Bailey is when you make an argument from the moat, um, and when people come and attack that, you basically run up to the Bailey and say, "That's not what I was saying. That's not what I meant by
Yeah, you
that."
defend. Yeah,
And
you
you
defend the
defend- But I
you
think
say you're defending. Yeah, but so well,
we got
the
Trojan horsed, is what we got.
we got Trojan horsed. Yeah, so multiculturalism, what it came in and said, we're going to solve the all of this violence,
Mm.
that and because what's causing the violence is prejudice between cultures, right? That's what is causing the violence. Now, it turns out when you look back, that's probably not what was causing the violence.
Now, when you look back, where?
In American history,
Okay.
right? That it's not that so you have the it really, the root of the violence was more the modernism, the Darwinism, the eugenic theories, and then those people in charge um, purposefully were using things like the freeway system and uh, the city planning, and in order to uh, divide up
Clearly,
people groups, and
clearly.
so that you could then create conflicts and then profit off
1956.
them.
Yeah,
Yep.
the highway plan from 1956 enacted ultimately in 1968. But it started even before then. You get the matter of fact, that's really kind of what destroyed Black Wall Street.
Mhm.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
if you look at it, people think, oh, because white people tore down. They did, but Black Wall Street didn't get its. I was going to bring up Black Wall Street, but only because, and let me just say why I do this, because everything that we talk about in one way or another, it was a microcosm of all the things that we see happening. Right. And it gives answers if you can kind of take that moment of time, the early 1920s, Black Wall Street, the destruction, the comeback of it. Actually, it didn't get its name until after they rebuilt Black Wall Street, is when they actually got its name, Black Wall Street. So everybody talks about, oh, white people destroyed Black Wall Street and then it was decimated. And it's like, well, actually, yes, that's true. But they were so resilient in building and hard work that they didn't really get their name of Black Wall Street until after they had rebuilt it and brought it back. So the wealth had still continued to flow through there. They couldn't tear it down because of the people were resilient. But the thing that did tear it down was that they put a highway through it.
Right.
And so all the businesses and the community was just split. And so now they don't
Yeah.
have the same sort of access. They're put us outside. Anyway, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. And they were in California. They
New York. Yeah.
lowered the freeway heights so that the buses couldn't fit through, in order to block off certain areas. And like they did some
Chicago.
their underhanded stuff, right? In order to,
It wasn't just racial either. Like, it was class. That's some of the
it was race and class, but the important, socialism requires in international, within the nation, rivalry within the nation, right?
Mm.
And so people had bought into socialism, and when the rivalry starts to go away because wealth starts to build up, they say we've got to stop that, because we've got to get the rivalry going again, because they were true believers in the eschatology of the eschatology of Karl Marx, right? He had an eschatological system that he said, this is how it goes. You only get to socialism when the rivalry that's built up by capitalism reaches a fever pitch. The problem is when you have people that start to make a bunch of money, or build wealth, I guess is a better way to put it. And this is what was going on at Black Wall Street. It didn't raise the rivalry. It all of a sudden it was dissipating rivalry because
Right. They were loving their neighbor.
wealth. Yeah, well, because wealth isn't the sort of thing where if they get rich, then somebody else has to get poor, right?
Mm,
Right, and it
right.
was proving that, right, that you have this whole group getting rich through hard work and serving their neighbor, and nobody else was getting poor on it. And in fact, it was raising the the life of everyone around it, right? So you have some folks getting really wealthy and everyone around them gaining wealth as well, because of the way that economics actually works, right? Because of the way the metaphysics of reality, that wealth can grow without anybody having to get poor
Mm,
because of it. Now, the poor, Jesus says, the poor you will always have with you, but that's not because of that's not because of the way wealth works. That's because of the way the human heart works, right?
mm,
You can it says the lazy man puts his hand to the porridge but won't lift it to his mouth. Right, the porridge is
mm,
there, it's on the spoon, but he won't lift it up to his mouth. It's so
mm.
but there's a metaphysic, there's a pagan metaphysic that says that this world has a limited amount, and in order for me to have some, I've got to take it from somebody. That's that um, that belief caused people to purposefully take away wealth and the production side wealth, um, through through the federal government mostly, and then through certain city governments and state governments as well. But um, and the because of that, it caused all sorts of rivalries. So I mean, you get Brooklyn in the late 70s, early 80s, completely destroyed
Yep.
by that. You get East LA. You get the CIA peddling cocaine and crack. You get the um, federal handout system, that you only get to keep if you don't get married, right? So
Or
you
you get
get
federal handouts. I believe it was to only white people, and they got to make sure they can't sell it to black folks, right? Like that was
right, yeah,
kind of
yeah.
handouts
So
when you're building a suburb. That's how most of the suburbs were built in during that time in the 60s. Was it 60s, 50s, 60s, something like that?
yeah, right, where they said we're gonna make all white neighborhoods.
Well, yeah, yeah, that was part of
Yeah,
it, and they couldn't. Part of the responsibility, the way you got qualified for it, you had to. Once you were qualified for it, you had to agree to make sure you wouldn't sell to an African
yeah,
American family. Can't remember if it was 40s or 50s, somewhere around in there, where the suburbs are starting to, this new culture of suburbs are being built, right?
right. And so this and that's what I'm saying is the divisions were not natural divisions.
Mm.
The divisions were enforced divisions for a purpose, and that's just that you that's you it starts in America in the 19 teens, creeping in. This is where the same group that wanted all of this this is where Margaret Sanger, who started Planned Parenthood, this is where she was running in these circles. um and so you've got this enforced um division that ends up causing all sorts of problems. And then you've got,
Mm.
really what happens is when you have the gas shortages, when you have the um the the really the Great Recession
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the 70s. You have violence on the rise,
That was a
going into the
yeah.
80s because of all of these factors finally coming to a head, and then the economic downturn that comes from international war, that may or may not have been started by the CIA. This is just a
Well,
whole nother.
don't throw nothing out. You gotta
But anyway, so you have all of that going on. So then you get all this violence breaking out, and people start saying, hey, we can fix this if we start pushing multiculturalism in the schools. We got to teach people to respect one another, because that's the root of all of
so
this.
because we have the conflict, they're looking at cultures, or they're looking
Yeah,
at nationalities,
they
and
start looking at cultures, right? That
uh,
and they're still using culture to really mean different nationalities, different ethnic groups, and we're
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
we're gonna teach one another. And it really is a form of secular humanism. And you get this secular humanism push, where you can have the benefits of Christendom under a secular government.
Witchcraft.
It is right.
Yeah.
It's the idea is, that you can have enforced humanism.
Mm.
Um, Whereas the humanism grew up in a Christian setting that said, where you have the, um, in the Middle Ages, where you have somebody like Marco Polo come back and say, let me tell you about the Asians that we met. um, and everybody gets really excited. Oh my gosh, there's people over there made in the image of God. What can we learn from them? And he says,
Mm.
first off, let me tell you about spices. And they're like, you can do that to food?
Right.
And so you get the spice trade, which has an which expands the imagination of Christians. I mean, they send missionaries over. There's a great book called Christ's Samurais, about a group of samurai that convert to Christianity.
Oh, I think we talked about that before.
The 13 or 1400s. It's a really, um, it's a fascinating book, but it shows that that multiculturalism, as uh, that there is a form of multiculturalism possible within Christendom, that
Only
says
possible in Christendom,
that's
right?
only possible within Christendom, that says the it's that has been there from the beginning, that says, hey, there's people over there that haven't heard about Jesus, and St. Brendan gets in a boat and says, let's go, right? That says, oh, hey, there's barbarians to the north, um these Germanic tribes up there, and let's let's go, right? And the reason we have the Icelandic sagas is because the Christian missionaries got there, and they would sit to listen to the stories, and they would write them down and send them home in letters to the Icelandic missionaries were sent from a church in Rome, and so they sent them back to Rome saying, oh my gosh, you would love these people, let me tell you some of the stories they tell, right? They've got this amazing, the Icelandic people are amazing storytellers, we've got to, and they would write home in their missionary support letters. um, they would put the stories that they had heard around the campfire, and that's why we have the Icelandic sagas, right? Like um, the desire, or the
Mm. Imago
the
Dei.
the
Yeah.
imago Dei, right? The desire um to rescue the things that people made, um is embedded within the theology of Christ dying for the world, right? Now there are things that have to go. There are things that but there are other things that, like, you don't say, hey, let's preserve this human sacrifice, right? You get rid of the human sacrifice. You get and uh you get rid of worship of nature, but the storytelling, you preserve the stories, you preserve the poems, you preserve the things created by humans because they're, well, at least the best stuff, because it's a reflection of something made by the image of God that has a reflection of God within it, right? It's a that mentality you can't have in secularism, right? Secular humanism doesn't hold. And
So
every attempt, you don't even get a half generation of it, right? People every once in a while they try to recover secular humanism, and each time it goes off the cliff faster than it did before.
So would it be fair to think about this as a secular multiculturalism versus multiculturalism that is under uh, a Christianity? So because we talked a little bit about this, which is um, I don't know if we talked about it. Maybe it was in a private conversation, but there is subcultures underneath the ultimate. What would you call that? Covenantal reality.
Yeah, I think that's the I would call it the well. There's there's layers of covenant realities that God has sort of layered underneath as foundational,
Okay, so then, well, people. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll let you finish that.
and then different people groups can get along when they have. So my problem with multiculturalism as an ism is that
It's an ism.
is that it depends upon that kind of abstraction understanding of culture.
Mm.
Um,
So is that it's depending on a form of paganism from the get go?
right, that you've got different people groups, and that the rivalry can be quashed by a secular power that's laid over the top of them all.
Mm.
If they
Mm.
will all submit to a secular power above them and give up so like this is where Christians don't do well in secular humanism, because you have to give up the things the you have to submit to a secular power over you. The problem is Jesus says that he's over all the powers.
So
So we don't do that well.
so then, Jason, then what? Right, I agree. So then, is that where classical liberalism failed,
I
or
think that's where
has
classical
classical liberalism failed us?
well, I think classical liberalism fails because it is a subset of secularism. Right? It is not because classical liberalism um, acts as if Christianity is one of the possible idea sets that
Right.
is vying for superiority of idea sets.
Or is it saying yes, fair, or is it saying it's the best one of the many?
Well, that's what so a Christian classical liberal person, that's what they would say, is you just give us the ability to give everybody
Make
free
our case.
speech,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and Christianity will win in the competition amongst idea sets. But
Right.
Christianity is not an idea set,
Right.
right? Jesus is Lord. Christianity is a competing kingdom.
Well, that's
Right?
what. Yeah.
Christianity, the kingdom of God is in competition with classical liberal kingdoms, right? It's so you can't say, well, the kingdom of God, it's going to fit here underneath classical liberalism, and it will be able to win with this classical liberal umbrella, with as long as you give us freedom of speech, um, because it's a kingdom, right? It,
It's a real
Jesus
government.
goes,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a real government, right? It's
Yeah.
the actual government of the universe, and so the and secular liberalism wants the universe to be governed to be governed by the neutral powers that can be scientifically observed, and then we choose a government of ourselves over we choose which government goes over us, and then we choose which religion we as a people group will have through then a debate of ideas.
This is. Go ahead.
I just that's just not in accordance with reality.
This is why a lot of my Christian nationalist friends are poking at classical liberalism,
Right.
rightly so, because
Absolutely rightly so.
right. And so I get that, and why I see them, because I feel like I'm not understanding some of the conversations they're having, because I'm using terms that they're not using, and they're using terms that I think they understand why I'm using my terms, but they're not telling me that they're not using the same terms I'm using. They're just using different terms and having the conversation. And then when I come and say, wait, when you talk about multiculturalism, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, here you go, trying to bring race back into this thing. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to make sure that we're fighting, because I think I agree with you guys. I'm trying to make sure that we're fighting the same battles. I'm not trying to push. I am a theonomist. I want every nation to be Christian, period.
Right.
Dot in. That's
Yeah.
all I'm arguing for. And if you and I are saying that in a sentence and we both agree, then please tell me where we're disagreeing at, because I'm seeing multiculturalism and I'm like, well, it depends on what you mean by that, right? Like it depends. Like what do you mean by that? And if you're talking about multiculturalism and the concept of which religious realities are going to govern us and ideas, oh, I'm you got me. I'm with you. Like if we're talking about, well, if it's going to be Christianity, which culture are we talking about? Covenantally. I'm all Christian. But if multiculturalism is arguing for Anglo-Saxism, I'm out. If you're anti-culture, if you're anti-multiculturalism arguing for that, that's not what I'm in. I'm not in that, because everybody's ethnos has to go and die at the cross. Right? That's it.
Right.
Everybody's got to go die at the cross. And what comes from that type of soil, we can, the subcultures or sub ethno underneath that I'm in. And so I think when people are talking about multiculturalism, there's a large group of people that think they're talking about multi-ethnicism, right? And and a lot of them aren't making the separation between the two, or trying not to make the separation between the two. And nobody's figuring out a way to make this conversation clear that that is or isn't what we're talking about. Now, if we were talking about Islam and Christianity, no, I'm not. I'm going Christianity all day long. But it seems to be we're having a conversation with multiculturalism that involves ethnos. And I don't know. I'm trying to figure out, because people are like, multiculturalism is bad. And I'm like, well, what do we mean by multiculturalism?
Yeah.
I might agree with you.
I think there's a couple of things.
Okay.
I think
maybe I'm hearing it right.
Well, I think you've got people that are asking that question in a dishonest way.
Okay.
And so I do see why there's some sensitivity amongst the Christian nationalists,
because
you've got
everybody else's stupid comments or something like
right.
that. Like, who's that? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think that there isn't clarity yet amongst the Christian nationalists that right now it's a reactionary movement. It's not and so it needs to, once it becomes a positive movement, then I think these are the discussions that you have what to make it into a positive movement, right? So right now it's a minority group that's saying, we know we're never going to actually get power, so we can say all the crazy stuff we want, right? We don't have to have a positive vision for how we're going to do it. We can just say, yeah. And this is just me bouncing around on Twitter. I don't have any stake in this game. Because I think that it needs to have I think they need a positive statement.
Christ is Lord. And
a positive statement of how you accomplish anything, right? Because that's where, when you're only dealing with abstractions. So let's say, for example, they say, like that. Well, there's that Matt Walsh quote recently about the Anglo-Saxons being replaced, and that's because Anglo-Saxons don't even have children. So why would anybody else want to protect a culture that they don't even feel like they need to perpetuate, right? And that is, I can get what he's saying. I think he's using culture in that abstracted way that it makes it unhelpful. Um, and he says, well, what's the solution? He's like, well, people need to love their people enough to have kids and pass down their culture or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
it's easy to complain when you don't think there's when it's not possible to solve the problem, to complain and say, here's what we need. It's different when you say, hey, this might actually work. How are we going to do it? How are we going to accomplish this? What would it look like to actually accomplish it? So when you start talking about um what do we grab every illegal and send them home, right? Send them home. You think, well, what if they're a third generation illegal? Where do you send them? Right?
Back
What?
to
No, you
Mexico.
home.
They were
You
here
send
illegally.
them. You
Back
send
to
them home, right?
home is Mexico.
Home is Mexico, right?
They were citizens here in America. They didn't go through citizenship. They're not Americans.
Right. But that is not that's not taking into reality the real problem, right? So
No, I think they could.
let's
Why wouldn't they say that and take into reality? Yeah, we still have a border problem. Let's build a wall. Let's figure out how to defend our borders and stop the multiculturalism from bleeding in. Because there's no
right.
question that that's what the liberals are using, right?
Oh, totally. But I think, I mean, so just to get it straight, I think we ought to have well-defined borders, a well-defined path to citizenship,
Amen. Amen.
and um and defend those things, right?
Okay, we in.
Right. So, but right now we don't.
Mm.
Right. So if you never think you're going to win, then you can have platitudes that say something like, hey, I think we should send the illegals home, right? If you're in charge and you say something like that, that means, how are we going to find them, get the buses together to get them there? Where are we going to drop them off? Which border are we going to drop them off in the middle of the Mexican desert? Is the Mexican government going to stop us with guns at the border? Right? Like, what all those questions,
right? I mean, it's not a hard reality to figure out. That's what Lincoln had to figure out when he freed the slaves. They said, well, we got options, right? Let's send all the slaves back to Africa. And they're like, well, that's going to be expensive. Probably not feasible. We don't even know where half of them go back now. Like, yeah, that's not
right?
option, right? So it's not like we couldn't do the math.
Well,
I get what you're saying, though.
Yeah, but how did Lincoln solve it?
He's like, yeah, that's not going to work.
It's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're in a similar reality. Wait, that it's, you can get people excited with some of these things, but it's actually not possible, right? Because Mexico is a large place. So when you say home, do you mean northern Mexico, southern Mexico? Do you mean central Mexico? Do you mean Mexico City? Should we drop them off in Mexico? Where is home for you? That's you're talking in abstractions still,
because you have that luxury. I get what you're saying
because you have that luxury, right? Now,
yeah.
But you can't. So, but I don't think I don't think that if you find a problem, you say, well, let's give up or whatever. I think you say, hey, I mean, I think I think the first thing we have to do is solve the fact that we have permeable borders, and enemies, right? We've got enemies and permeable borders, right? Now but then you've also got the layered jurisdiction that God gives us, where the nation has one responsibility, and then he gives us the church, which has a different responsibility when it comes to immigrants. It just does, right? If the church sees, so if you're a police officer on the border or border patrol officer, right, you have a very particular job. If you're a pastor along the border, you have a different job, right? And those jobs can fit together. and you have to, but you have to take all. So it's not the real solutions aren't chantable. And that's the reality of the world we live in. And
I'm getting into
I
the
don't.
minute. Go ahead.
Well, I just and so uh, the first thing you have to do is actually put together a positive vision, and stop having a reactionary vision and start having a positive vision for what your goal is. And I think that's what Christian nationalism is debating right now.
Yeah, I think they're working through a lot of the positive vision, which is what is making some afraid or concerned. So
Well,
I
because
don't.
some of the people's positive visions you look at and you're like, ooh, I don't think Jesus would like that much. You could call it Christian, but that doesn't sound very Christian.
I will say this as a theonomist, my positive vision. I think a lot of people would feel the same way. Because there's a huge amount of ignorance as to what a nation is supposed to be, how it's supposed to function, what authority it's supposed to have, and who can do what for how much and for how long, right? Like those are people are very ignorant on those things. And so when you start setting out, and with my Christian nationalist brothers who are setting out a Christian um, nation and are thinking about what is a godly nation supposed to be like, I think they're going to catch heat in the same way that as a theonomist would too. And I don't think that a
Yeah.
lot of them. That's well, that's exactly what I think Wolf is trying to do in his book is set that image out, right? And so
Set forward a positive vision.
absolutely. And so, but the conversations, I guess I'm wondering, are we talking past each other in some of these?
I think we mostly are. And maybe what we need is one of those spaces that we did where you have the multiple people and you get somebody from different groups and you just have a conversation.
I wish I want that, but because I want the G3 guys to come in. I want Josh and I want Scott Annual and I want Virgil. I want Stephen Wolf. I want Andrew Isker. I want Andrew Torba. I want Joel Webman. I want all these guys, AD Robles. I want all these guys to come down and let's have the conversation what we're dialing up here. And because I think it's really comfortable, and I watch this happen for people to write their blog posts from the comforts of their seats, engaging on Twitter, and really not have a real dialogue. Well, what do you mean by that? What are you trying to get at? And I have a position. I know what I want, but I don't know anybody who's willing to try and take what the people say at face value and then apply it and say, is this what you mean? Is this not what you mean? What's in conflict with what this person is saying? And I wish we can have a Phil Donahue moment. My goodness, where we can actually try and have a conversation to figure out, because here's what I figured out. I figured out after reading some of the posts that are going on and watching people talk, I realized I don't know what you're trying to say anymore. And I think I'm on your team, but I don't know what you're trying to say. And I don't think you're clarifying it really well. So you can put somebody like me on your team. Right. And especially like Matt Walsh talking about, you can't separate your race and your culture. I'm like, well, then I'm screwed. What I moved to Moscow, Idaho for? What am I supposed to do? And I hear these guys talking, and the idea, and that's why it's helpful to hear what you're talking about with multiculturalism, because when I hear multiculturalism, I don't hear the same thing. I hear what they pushed, and maybe I still have some of the secular idea apart from me, and I'm applying a Christian mindset over the top of it. I need to probably separate and understand it's not what they're talking about. But nobody has really tried to define what multiculturalism is, so that I know they're not saying, yeah, you don't marry white women and we don't marry black women. And you can if you want, but it's better to preserve those races. And I'm like,
right.
If I came to Moscow, Idaho, trying to preserve black culture, I'm saying, like, or my black, let me put it like this, or I'm trying to preserve my black skin, I'm going to fail at that. But here, I will tell you this. My little mixed grandbabies are going to be some of the most black culture things going to be saturated all through. I'm going to love it. Right.
But this is why it's the same definition of culture that Joe Biden can say, you didn't vote for me, you ain't black.
Not black. Right. Yeah. And that's not defined either. So,
so
funny.
but that's what I'm saying is like, I think you've got the guys on you've got now guys on the right that have said, okay, I'll buy into your definition of culture, and then I'm going to protect mine. And I think we need to say, well, no, your definition of culture isn't coming from the Bible.
Right. So, but and this is the kind of things where I'm like, when we rolled into Minneapolis, my kids don't have a context for the ghetto. They don't have that context. It's different context. And praise God, you know. But there's things that are there that I want to burn, and there's things that are there that I want to magnify, right? There was a lot of good that God did in those streets, right, for me. And I want to
Right.
take that and I want to submit it all to Jesus, and I want him to take it as an offering, and whatever he decides to do with that and permeate it, amen, right? But that's what I want to do. I'll lay it on the altar and burn it up, let the incense come from it. But I remember we had a moment where the police are driving by, and I was like, oh yeah, I need to remind my kids and teach them about how the police see them. Need to remind them about that. And show them like how to help the police officers make distinctions between them and the others. That's kind of important.
Right.
And then there's a dude on the corner who's selling drugs. And I was like, oh yeah, got to tell my kids about how he sees them and how to see him before he sees them. Right. And I got to remind them, like, you know, and then my kids are just like, oh my goodness, Dad, there's so many black people everywhere. You know, these are black people like us. And I was just like, I had to stop for a minute. I had to say, they are black people. They're not like us.
Right.
Right? Like, they are black people, but there's a different, like, you know, there is a culture inside of a culture, and there's a group of people that don't reflect that well, right? Like, and I want to try and express that to them without separating them from it. You know what I mean? So this guy who's on the corner that's black and who's selling drugs and who's got his pants below his waist and who's not going to honor your mother and talk crazy to you and all of, he's not like us. See this guy over here who is hustling and selling t-shirts and going inside of the barbershops and making his money and hustling. He's like us. Okay. I want you to know the difference. Like, that guy, he probably went to jail and can't get a normal job, and he's not letting anything stop him. And he's going out and making money regardless. That's a hustler. Like that's good. You want to do that. Whatever it takes for you to be able to make money within the confines of not stealing and no crime, like, do those things. And there's a lot of people around here who got that mentality. Learn those things, right? But the guys who sit up here and are going to be on the system and going to take advantage of everybody, we don't. That's not this. We don't share the same cosmology they do. We don't share the same world that they do. They're like somebody else. And so just don't think because you got the same skin that y'all the same kin. Because you can got other people who don't have your skin who are closer to your kin, right? Because of the cosmological realities that you share. And matter of fact, I'm not even saying something that everybody don't agree with, because who was it that said skin folk ain't all kin folk? Like, everybody knows that. Everybody, that's why, exactly why Joe Biden can say you ain't black, because there is a concept, a reality of what that means, right? He just is on the wrong side of that reality. And even black folks say what Joe Biden said, right? Like, black folks be on the same thing.
So,
yeah,
you know, well, I'm just working all this stuff out as we go.
It's not as clean and as polished as I want it to be either, but it's just
not. But here's my thought though. What we've never talked about is taxonomy. Right? We've never talked about taxonomy, and every cosmology has with it comes with a taxonomy. So a taxonomy is how you is the division into groups. And Carl Linnaeus, who's the guy who set out the current taxonomy for us, was he was late 1700s. He was a secular
Carl
Linnaeus, Linnaeus, I believe. He was Dutch, so it's got a weird spelling. But his taxonomy is where we get white. Why we call people with skin
Okay.
color like mine, right, peach, white, right? So he had white, black, red, yellow as his taxonomy, right? So he was the one that assigned colors to people groups, um, and divided it up that way. And but he was a full secularist, and his taxonomy was derived from the the um, cosmology, and so Darwin was one of his kind of star followers. So he who gave a Darwin came along, and Linnaeus had already given us the evolutionary taxonomy.
Mm,
What Darwin gave us was a mechanism um, to explain the taxonomy,
mm,
right? But the taxonomy of evolution was already in place. So, and what's happening now is the taxonomy is being given to us by the secular left, and the right is just saying, well, if that's the taxonomy, we better defend our branch of the of the divisions of the human race, rather than saying, well, what's the real, where are the real divisions, right?
mm,
Linnaeus 100% said, I'm going to divide it up completely by sight. And that's
mm,
what culture does, right? Is
mm.
it's we're and we're told to not
Ah, I
not
see.
judge anyone by sight. We're just supposed to be judged by faith, right?
So the way that we even view culture is in Carl Linnaeus's Linnaeus, Linnaeus,
Linnaeus,
Linnaeus.
yeah.
We don't need, we have an imposed a presupposition of culture that automatically is observed through sight.
Yeah, by sight and not by faith, right? So
When we think of
um
ethnos, when we think of ethnicity, it's sight more than
right, yeah. So this is, and this is where, like, in the early Middle Ages, you've got a guy like you've I think you've got two good examples of it, Charlemagne and Alfred, who each conquered a people group, right?
Mhm.
Each conquered an ethnos that was not their own. And
Yeah.
Charlemagne said, you can be baptized or you can die. And they chose baptism. And within 100 years, they were singing his praises. But his spiritual advisor, he said he was going to do that. His spiritual advisor said, that's a bad idea. That should not be the options that you give them. You, uh, you should give them the options of leaving the land or being baptized, right? Um, and
Which I think I
and
agree with. Which I think I agree with that. I think I
yeah,
agree
I
with that.
agree.
Both
Yeah.
places sounds right.
So in that setting, the
Well, I
king
don't know. That's
is making that decision, and it's a tough one because both of these worked out. Because then Alfred, who had Charlemagne as a hero, but partly because the letters that Charlemagne's spiritual advisor had written, he had bound for him, so that man that advised Charlemagne could advise him as a king as well. And so he conquered a people group and gave them the option of be baptized or be
ex,
exiled,
yeah.
right? And they decided to be baptized as well. So you get the Dane laws, and you get the stuff that grows out of that situation. But they didn't. They looked at the people group and said that by faith, um, that uh, if they join with God, then they can be with us, right? They're by sight, their culture is different. They're that the Danes were pirates. Basically, they were pirates that got um, that got conquered, um, and he said, if we baptize them, give their kids a Christian education, if they start coming into worship, then the sacraments, the worship of the Lord, the liturgy, the and then the Christian culture that they are joined to will sort out what needs to be preserved and what will go away.
Mm.
Right. It's because the real way to preserve anything is to bring it before the Lord in worship, and it will be sorted there. Right. Bring it before the Lord for judgment, and it will be sorted there. If you want to know if music is good music or bad music, start setting psalms to it, start writing hymns in that, and start singing worship music in that music, and it will sift quickly.
Mm.
Because you bring it before the Lord for judgment, and the Spirit of God will judge what's good and preserve it, and what's bad, and it will go away. The true preservative is worship, is the worship of God, and the by sight, that those people shouldn't have been able to join together, but by faith, he saw the possibilities of them coming in. Right now, it was not a free for all, and it was the requirement was, hey, come join yourself to the Lord. Right, so it's not secular multiculturalism, but it is not, but it's also a full rejection of Carl Linnaeus. Right,
Do you think?
it's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
taxonomy.
I
They
see
got
that.
their taxonomy from their cosmology. Right, their
I
cosmology gave them a different taxonomy.
There is, that's interesting, and so let me, and so correct me if I get this wrong, then. But I think a lot of people are seeing, um, are hearing the call, "Hey, come before the Lord," and then they feel like, though, what this kind of imperialistic reality is like, and here's what that looks like, and but it's all things that are really underneath the subculture of that, instead of the covenantal realities of that. So then we get an imperialistic concept put over the top of the covenant realities. And I think that's what some people are sniffing. They're like, well, what is that? What does that? What does that mean? What does that look like? What is?
Here,
You know what I'm
I
saying?
mean,
Does that make sense?
yeah, imperialism is unavoidable. It's
Yeah,
only a question of who's the emperor.
right. And
Right.
exactly. And so that's what I mean by what's getting layered in there is, oh, I don't even know a better way to say it. Um, this is where a lot of people are saying, well, this is white, this is Anglo-Saxism. And it's like, sure, I have no problem with some of that being what it is, but it's almost as like, well, that's Christianity, and that's what we're defending. You see what I'm saying? And it's like,
Yes.
instead of it being, this is the way in which Anglo-Saxism has been baptized through Christianity. What does yours look like, baptized through Christianity?
Right.
But there's no real question about what that second half is not favorable.
No, I think you're right. I think that is not,
That's
you
what I think
don't
people
have that
nobody's having
happening.
that fight yet. Nobody's having that fight yet, or argument, conversation yet. That's what I want to have that conversation. Is like, so then, um, because if yeah. Anyway,
But it's, yeah, it's because the principle is, um if you want to save your life, then you need to give it up. Right, the principle is, if you want to save your culture, quote
yeah,
unquote culture, if you want to say, yeah, you need to give it up to the Lord. And if you want to lose it, then hold on to it really tightly, and um and you'll lose it. Whereas if you give it up to the Lord, you receive it back, washed and cleaned and baptized, and over the course of generations. And it's that way and it's that way for every group of people. The Indian church right now in India is that's what they're dealing with. The Chinese church is dealing with that. In the Middle East, when I was in um Dahuk, and talking with the pastors there, as they were dealing with the reality of church, of Christianity being made legal for the first time in over 1,000 years. Um, and now it's back under it's dealing with the Islamic, the Syrian are awful, and the Syrian army right now is doing terrible stuff over there. But they're but what was interesting is how easy it was to slip into the worship service of this Iraqi church, even though I didn't speak the language, because as soon as we got before the Lord in worship, it was obvious that we were of the same people,
Yeah.
But having dinner and things, all sorts of. I mean, they thought we were
radical differences, I'm sure.
Radical differences. They couldn't believe we ate bacon.
Oh,
They were like, pigs. They were like, well, do you eat dog too? That was the question when they found out we ate pig. They're like, oh, do you eat dog too? Because they were in the same category, pig and dog.
No, we're Christians. So let me kind of poke this from the other side too. I think it is in the West, a lot of the Western culture, or let me try and be more specific. A lot of that's not fair to say either. In the West, the association between Anglo-Saxon culture and Christianity are so intertwined that it's hard for, I think, a lot of people to see those as different, right? In the West,
in America, at least,
because America. Let me say that, and that's what primarily what I was thinking about in America. And so there is a concerted effort from the multiculturalism that is out right now to try and not separate those. Actually, I think try and separate those two, but in the meantime, burn the Christianity off the Anglo-Saxonism too, right?
Yep.
I've even seen Black people saying, "Hey, white folks, you have to find whatever your nationality is and cling to it for dear life," right? Just like we're doing with Black. And I'm like, and that's inside of Christendom, right? And so they're trying, but I think it's a concerted effort to try and burn off the Christendom from that tie, right? If my family for 5 or 6 generations have known nothing but Christianity, that's going to be so intermingled and so intertwined that you're not going to be able to separate our culture and Christianity from each other. So if you try, you're only intending to burn both things down, right? And I think that's a reality. And part of the pushback coming from a lot of folks that they see those two things under attack, right? And so I can understand some of the.
But I think though the question, I think we can, and this is where I think sometimes we get crosswise, and talk past one another, and why I think it's important to actually be having the conversation, because I think we all agree on what to put off. It's the question of then what do we put on?
I don't think we agree on what to put off.
Well, I don't think anybody's arguing. Okay, this is where maybe you can show me up on my ignorance. But are there Christians out there arguing for secular multiculturalism? Are there Christians out there arguing for like polytheism in the marketplace, or?
Yes and no. I think there are. I think there's a lot of Christians still arguing for the classical liberal order in a lot of ways.
Okay.
So I think that's depending on how far you want to go and how much you want to put that on them. But I think there are a group of that. But when you talk about put off, I guess put off what and where.
So like what if you've got the secular homogenization, that push that's going on right now, that is at root socialism or communism or something along those lines, that wants to get all the way down to gender in terms of the homogenization. That I think we all agree that is a problem.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That push, we don't want that for America. right? We don't want the homogenization, um, that because it is, I think, really is an attempt to return to some sort of um, statist paganism. So we all look at that and agree we don't want that. That's what I mean. We want to put that off.
Okay, fair enough.
But then when we start saying, what's the thing? What is the thing that will hold things together? I think that's where you start to get a whole bunch of different answers right now. You've got everything from like America grew out of the DNA of the Anglo-Saxons. I heard somebody actually say that, which is so compromised in it. that is so compromised with a secular worldview, with a modernist, secular, post-Enlightenment, anti-Christian worldview, that a Christian saying that is basically trying to refry some paganism and serve it up. They're like, hey, that pancake's terrible, flip it over and we'll serve it, and now I'm serving it, and so it's good, right? They're serving the same pancake. The all the way to people that are arguing for the restoration of Christendom. You've got a really broad swath, the restoration of Christendom, where each nation has its own ambassador to the Holy Roman Empire, and you've got the layered authorities of Holy Roman Empire and international ecclesiastical structures.
Integralism, is that how you say that? Is that kind of what that is? Integralism, which I see a lot of my guys like Michael Fallon, he's concerned about that type of setup because it's kind of Roman Catholic integralism, right?
I haven't heard it called integralism, but I think that is the first round of it in the West was Roman Catholic, right? But you've got folks arguing for a return to something along those lines, right? So you've got everything from like, here's what we can replace this secular push for homogenization. So, and like you have like the communists in Russia got rid of dresses for women because they wanted homogenization. Like, it gets all the way down to to that level in communism. Everybody wears the same clothes. Men and women wear the same clothes. You've got one set of clothes for all the workers, and they all wear the same thing. They got rid of the 7-day calendar during the French Revolution. Like, the homogenization, because of 10 is a 10-day calendar, where 9 days on and 1 day off is better math or something.
As long as it doesn't model the creation of God.
Right? Yeah, right, exactly. So I think you've got this push to homogenize on the left that we all want to resist, but I think the disagreement is in the goals. And I think that's the conversation that needs to happen. And it needs to happen in an honest way where we can all say, hey, we all agree on that, right? Yes. Okay. So what are we arguing for? Let's let iron sharpen iron. And in an honest, open discussion where we don't have to come to the same agreement, but we can like believe each other to be honest, have that conversation. That's what I think doesn't happen.
I'm gonna say I want to have that conversation. I really do. And I've been around long enough to say that there's a few controversies that I've seen that bother me, and this starts to feel a little bit like some of those. I remember the emergent movement when it first happened and it first came out. I remember early 2000s, and when Todd Friel was on the streets evangelizing and witnessing, and we were at the college campuses. And all of a sudden, people were denying truth. It was the first time I've ever heard anything so stupid in my life. I don't believe in truth. Like, you just made a truth claim. Like, there's no such thing as truth. You can do whatever you want to do. and this was early 2000, and just went crazy. And then we started seeing it happen like 4 or 5 or 6 years later, even in the church. So we have Doug Pagitt and Brian McLaren and the emergent movement that started permeating the church. And there were a lot of people who got lost in that movement because they were saying the church is stale.
Yeah.
And they might have been right? The majority of churches trying to find a good Bible-believing, Bible-teaching church was stale. And so you have that. And so, but they weren't being honest about their terms. They weren't being, everything was movable. The way that they used scripture was in a form that it could be manipulated where you couldn't get them to give a clear answer about anything. And so they lived in the shadows and was able to move about and continue to go on. And we couldn't come to a conclusion about if they were Orthodox or not. Right.
Right.
We don't know what they are.
When you had some guys that joined themselves with them early on,
yes,
then sounded the alarm, right? Like Dan Kimball and who he's like, hey, everybody, these
Miller.
guys in the back rooms are not Orthodox.
Yeah, I remember.
Run away.
Yeah, there are a lot of guys who the Young Western Reform movement blended in with the emergent movement at the time.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have a place in evangelicalism with the way that they dressed, the things they wore, the kind of style of church they were having. They just didn't fit in traditional evangelicalism. So they blended in really well with the emergent church. And so that's how, they got them. And so the emergent church movement, and then, anyway, so I've seen enough of these that when they come up, I'm like, let's do something really clear. Let's get to what these terms mean. Because if I don't have understanding of what you're trying to communicate and what you're trying to do, and I'm on the team,
right,
and I'm wondering what are we trying to hide? And everybody's like, oh, you haven't done enough reading. Look, you can't tell me that. That's not fair. That's not fair. I've been on this game for a Christian nation before some of y'all were even born. So you don't get to tell me that. I'm sorry. I'm boomering you right now.
Okay, boomer.
Yeah, I'll take that one. But that's all you got in your back pocket. I got history, right? So I've been in this game way before you, I've been going this direction, and so I totally believe in the idea and the mission. I'm post millennial in every way with that, right? But I'm trying to figure out what do we mean by some of these terms, and then what does it look like to enact them. And then what limits our ability once our faithfulness is proved and the evidence of that over time leads to success, what does it look like when we have the rightful authority to enact biblical law in a nation? I want to have those conversations, because if I'm cheering for you to get there, I want to make sure that I'm selecting the right person who's going to be a good representative, or is at least teaching the kind of things that will help develop a good representative for my grandkids, right? And so at this point, I just want to have what do you call this? A terms meeting. Let's just lay out terms, lay out the words. Let's talk about what we mean with this and what does this look like? And then I've totally hijacked everything you wanted to talk about today. My bad.
No, that's okay. I think though,
this wasn't even planned. This wasn't even a planned conversation. This is a conversation I need to have with you.
Yeah. But this is where, because I come at these, I because of my my ignorance in terms of the last 30 years of debates. I tend to have an older debates in my head than the most recent ones. When I look at it and think, in Ezra, when it's time to rebuild and they say, yeah, hooray, we're so excited, let's run off, where we're going to rebuild, we've got the opportunity. And then they say, where should we start? And everybody looks around and says, does anybody even know what we're rebuilding? And then they're like, well, there's that dude Ezra,
right? He's been in the library.
Let's go get him. That's when I look at it, and think, we we don't. Everybody doesn't need to have a solid understanding and education, but we need some people that do understand this stuff. Where are they going to come from? And so that's the other question that I would have is we need a terms discussion, and we need a is it what if you were to practically lay out how to get from here to there, what in your mind, what does that look like? Because I think that people that um there's there's actually two debates going on right now. And the first one is, what's the ideal? And that's a debate that I think is really important and needs to happen, and we need to get to, what are we shooting for? Chesterton says that when everything gets turned around, you actually need somebody, and you need an impractical man to come in and remind us of the ideal that gets us reoriented in the right direction. And I don't think we agree on the ideal right now. So I think that's where if we got to get our terms in order. We got to get, so that's one of the questions is, well, what's actually the ideal? And then the other is, and I think we need to separate it out from the practical discussion, right? Because I think we've got revolutionaries in our midst, and that's, and we need to be able to say, if there's going to need to be a revolution, right, then we're not, generally speaking, Christians haven't transformed through revolution.
Right.
That's not been the normal way that Christians
so what do you think about America in itself?
I think we resisted King George's attempt at a revolution. So I think King George tried to reorder the empire, reorder the British Empire, away from the medieval covenantal, rights of an Englishman style empire. And when he tried to reorder it, we said, whoa, you can't. The British, the government of the British government can't tax us. They're not our authority. That's not how this works. This has never been how it works. So the Declaration of Independence, I mean, they attempted to get King George to keep his covenant vows, or to fulfill his covenant responsibilities, but he didn't. And so we had to defend ourselves against a conquering enemy. The British were a conquering enemy because they were trying to reorganize the governmental system that had been put in place by the throne, and the throne refused to protect us from the redcoats, who were the king was working together to revolt against the historic the actual legal system. So they were attempting to overthrow the legal system. We said, no, we want to keep it in place, and then we overthrew it and wrote a new constitution. But that's a whole nother discussion.
Man, all right.
But then it got voted in legally, so it still is the legal law of the land.
It's a legal law,
just like Joe Biden voted in legally.
Here you go. All right.
Well, after they cheated all over the country, he's still the legal president, because we don't vote presidents in. The Electoral College makes the president, and then they did that. They made Joe Biden the president.
You starting stuff right when we end it. I'm done. I'm not talking to you anymore. That's it. That's enough.